off the table.
There was no defense to this ridiculous hoax. They should be ashamed of themselves, absolutely ashamed. And you know who knew it was a phony cloud more than anyone else? Was Schiff and Nadler and Schumer and Pelosi, every one of them.
If we have a case for impeachment, that's the place we will have to go. The stronger our case is, the worse the Senate will look for just letting the president off the hook.
It was a historical day because the day is the day that we close the book on this investigation. It is time that America turns the page.
Doug McKelway is live in Washington with more. Doug.
Good morning, John. And one of the dangerous signs of these divided political times is that one party, as you just heard there, is looking at the sky and seeing daytime. The other party is looking at the sky and seeing nighttime. In the aftermath of the Mueller's testimony yesterday, in which the former special counsel demonstrated apparent signs of confusion and a failure to grasp the very details of the report that he supervised, the Democrats vowed to press on.
Well, the very next step, I'm not going to talk longer range, the very next step, either tomorrow or Friday, is we're going into court to to ask for the grand jury material and to enforce the subpoena against Mr. McGahn.
On the other hand, Republicans and the White House say Mueller's struggles as a sign, saw his struggles as a sign that his investigation was run by the handful of Democratic underlings in his office with political motivations, and that his testimony was the nail in the coffin of the Mueller investigation.
I think if you watched the hearings today and you watched both the Intel and Judiciary Committee, we discussed this issue of exoneration and where that legal theory that he would even come out was a very novel theory because it's never been used before. It was not something for him to exonerate, which is also a flip side to say there was not enough there to find guilt. So as we move forward, again, if I was the Democrats, and just as they just got through talking about it in their own press conference, I would be frustrated too, because they had promised and promised and promised that Mueller investigation was the gold standard.
Republicans were nevertheless frustrated by Mueller's refusal, which was stipulated in advance, not to testify outside the bounds of the written report.
3 times he lied to the FBI, yet you didn't charge him with the crime.
Excuse me, did you say one? I'm sorry, did you say 193?
Volume 1, 193. He lied 3 times, you pointed out in the report. Why didn't you charge him with the crime?
I can't get into internal deliberations with regard who would or would not be
charge a lot of other people for making false statements.
And still to come, regardless of whatever the Democrats choose to do in the future, are the findings of 2 more investigations, the Inspector General's report, which is set to be due out sometime around Labor Day or shortly thereafter, and then the Department of Justice investigation, which Attorney General Bob Barr is heading up. No time frame for the completion of that investigation. John?
Doug McKelway in Washington, where things are still boiling. Thank you.
And for more on all this, let's bring in Guy Lewis, former U.S. attorney who served with Attorney General Barr during the George H.W. Bush administration. Guy, good morning to you.
Morning.
So what moment stood out to you the most yesterday?
Well, it was interesting because there were times that Bob seemed to be sort of off his game, that he had to look to his deputy, that he seemed to be sort of flustered and not aware of some of the details of his report. But Sandra, you got to remember that those in the media mainly who don't know Bob Mueller and expected some kind of John the Baptist preacher to come out and be this great orator, I mean, that's just not who he is, and that's not what was going to happen.
Well, Democrats certainly went into all of this, Guy, with the goal of having Robert Mueller reveal damning evidence against the president. Did they find any?
I don't think they did. I think the hearing came out very flat. I mean, if you went in believing that the Mueller investigation was a witch hunt, I think you walked away with the same kind of sentiment. If you came in thinking that the president was guilty, it's over with, let's convict him and send him to jail, you probably thought the same thing, and that seems to be where the Democrats are going. But I don't think that's the road, frankly, that I'd want to travel based on the facts and the law as I've seen them.
Well, the president's lawyer, Jay Sekulow, an outspoken critic of this investigation from the beginning, he's been all over the place. He penned an op-ed published on FoxNews.com. He went on Fox News at Night with Shannon last night. He is making the case that it is time to move on. Here's Jay Sekulow.
This was going to be the game-changing moment And what was it? It was a game-changing moment, all right, that this is done. I've been saying case closed. I think this just reiterates case closed.
But if you've seen reaction from some Democrats in recent hours since those hearings concluded, there are some still making the case for impeachment. We'll hear a lot more as we go throughout the day. Chris Coons, the Democrats, going to be joining us in just a bit. But will Democrats choose to continue with their push to impeach the president?
You better bet the house, yes. They are going to work this thing until the cows come home. They are going to continue in court. They're going to continue issuing subpoenas. They're going to continue looking for documents. They're going to continue to hold hearings. I mean, this is their lead up to the next election. So you better bet that this is going to continue full blast.
Guy, before I let you go, a lot of people are talking about this exchange with the former special counsel and John Ratcliffe, the Republican from Texas, in that hearing room yesterday.
Can you give me an example other than Donald Trump where the Justice Department determined that an investigated person was not exonerated because their innocence was not conclusively determined?
I cannot, but this is a unique situation.
Okay, well, you can't. Time is short. I've got 5 minutes. Let's just leave it at you can't find it because I'll tell you why. It doesn't exist.
It was an intense moment yesterday, Guy. I know you were watching that, but the Congress was making the case that he broke the rules by writing about decisions that were not reached. Final thoughts on that?
So, Sandra, I've never been a fan of the special prosecution law. Exactly how Judge Starr and Bob Mueller and others, both sides, both administrations have been appointed. It places the prosecutor in an untenable position. And listen, give Bob Mueller credit. He's a Vietnam veteran. He's a good man. He's a prosecutor's prosecutor. But prosecution and politics don't mix. What we saw yesterday, and it doesn't work.
It was really something, Guy. We appreciate your reaction this morning. There's a heck of a lot more coming up on all of that. Thank you, Guy. Well, as we just mentioned, Democratic Senator Chris Coons will be joining us in just a few moments. Republican Congressman Jim Jordan, who questioned Mueller at yesterday's hearing, will also join us. That's about 20 minutes from now. And next hour, former Congressman and prosecutor Trey Gowdy will be our headliner. So lots more reaction coming up.
Now, this Fox News alert from Puerto Rico, where celebrations have replaced protests after Governor Ricardo Rossello announced his resignation. This comes after weeks of demonstrations that demanded he step down. Brian Yenis is live in San Juan with more. Brian.
John, good morning. Puerto Rico exhales after 2 weeks of tension. Ricardo Rossello resigning, becoming the first governor to do so in Puerto Rico's history. But it wasn't without drama. There was a 5 p.m. press conference that was abruptly canceled. And then 6.5 hours later, Rossello comes out with a Facebook video resigning, effective August 2nd.
Many of you have expressed the right to freedom of expression. I have received everything that you have said, and I have heard you loud and clear.
Thousands taking to the streets of Old San Juan celebrating, fireworks going off in the streets, music playing, pots and pans being banged on. We were there last night and spoke to some of these young protesters.
We are tired, we are excited, we're happy. I can't even believe it. I can't even describe it. This is historic. I feel like I'm going to have to pinch myself and check the news to see if he was actually saying the truth.
Now there are questions about what comes next. Secretary of Justice Wanda Vasquez is now next to be governor, but there are questions as to whether or not she's going to last. Allegations of corruption and people already calling on her to resign. This is all a culmination of 12 straight days of protests, people upset with corruption and mismanagement. House of Representatives meeting today as to whether or not they're going to move forward with impeachment proceedings. John?
All right, Brian Yenis in Puerto Rico. Brian, thank you.
Fox News alert now, a federal court handing the Trump administration a defeat on immigration. The judge blocking new restrictions on migrants seeking asylum as another judge ruled for the new policy hours before. A live report on what happens next with all of that, plus this.
The fact of the matter is, this is not a continuation of our administration. I'm very proud to have served with him. I doubt whether he would have picked me if his accusations about my being wrong on civil rights was correct.
Joe Biden still talking about attacks on his record from Senators Booker and Harris. Now he has a new warning for his rivals ahead of the next Democratic debates.
Plus, new surveillance video showing a college student just before she was murdered in Mississippi, as well as new details on the suspect now accused of killing her. We'll have the details just ahead.
I've seen him at the bars before. Yeah, he's always out all the time on the square. Definitely shocking because he never seemed like he didn't look like the kid who would do something like that.
Would go in and talk before and after meetings, and they'd be laughing and smiling and say, "Can you believe that we're getting away with this?"
That's President Trump reacting to Robert Mueller's House testimony yesterday, saying it was a bad day for Democrats. Republican lawmakers claim his testimony debunked the Democrats' theories of obstruction and collusion. Joining us now, Democratic Senator Chris Coons, who serves on that chamber's Judiciary and Foreign Relations committees. Senator, I know you were busy with other things yesterday, but give us your takeaway from Robert Mueller's testimony. Does it advance the case against the president, in your view?
Well, what I think was most important about Special Counsel Mueller repeating the details of his report yesterday was his emphasis on how Russia strongly attempted to interfered in our 2016 election, our 2018 election, in response to a question from Republican Congressman Hurd of Texas, said they are continuing to do it even today. Here in the Senate, we had a hearing on the Judiciary Committee earlier this week where Chris Wray, the FBI director, President Trump's personally chosen FBI director, repeated that same message, that we need to be working on securing our 2020 elections. Tomorrow, I'll be at the Delaware State Fair, where I'll get to see our new election machinery in Delaware. We were one of 5 states that had no paper trail to audit the outcomes of our elections. We've just purchased new election machinery with the grant funding that was made available 2 years ago to states. I think that is something we should be working on, and I think that was one important takeaway from the Mueller investigation, was the depth and breadth of Russian interference in our 2016 election.
Guy Lewis, a former federal prosecutor, was just on with us. He said that in his view, the special counsel or special prosecutor law doesn't work. He called it a mix of prosecution and politics that just doesn't work. What do you think about that?
Well, as you know, I had a bipartisan bill in the last Congress and in this Congress that would strengthen the special counsel, make it harder for him to be abruptly fired for no reason. There are regulations in the Department of Justice today that prevent that, but I think it should be in statute. I do think an important part of Mueller's testimony was that he detailed a number of ways in which the president and his senior team attempted to interfere with the investigation. You just played a clip of him calling it a hoax and a witch hunt. I don't believe it was a hoax or a witch hunt. I think it was an important and appropriate investigation, and I think the fact that Special Counsel Mueller was able to complete his investigation is something we all should be proud of. There's other countries around the world where presidents are above the law, aren't challenged, aren't questioned. I think it's important that Special Counsel Mueller was able to finish his investigation.
But the White House would make the point that he was able to finish the investigation with the essential cooperation of the White House, that they didn't block anything that he wanted, that he asked for.
I agree, and I think that's important.
All right. There are some other things we want to talk about. You're on the Senate Relations Committee. Iran is a boiling hot issue right now.
It is.
And you were talking about that while most of the nation's attention was riveted on the Mueller investigation and his testimony.
Yes, thank you. Yesterday, we had the acting legal advisor from the State Department and one of the senior members of the State Department testify in front of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee about what's the legal authority on which the president might rely if he chose to begin a war with Iran. I think it's clear that if Iran attacks American troops, kills American troops in the region, the president has the authority under the Constitution to defend our armed forces in his role as commander-in-chief. But what we were debating was the 2001 authorization for the use of military force. Not one of the currently serving senators on our committee voted for that authorization in the Senate. A few did in the House. But you know, there are, I think, 80 of us now serving in the Senate who were not here and did not vote for the 01 AUMF because, frankly, it was 19 years ago. What we are trying to do is to come up with a modernized, relevant, current authorization for force. And I think it was a vigorous and important discussion about what kinds of authorities the president and the executive branch needs to detain folks here or overseas, and what sort of authority there needs to be for our ongoing conflicts in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Syria, and elsewhere, and then what limits there are. I don't believe the ONAUMF authorizes the president to start a war with Iran, and I think it's important that we have that discussion.
We've already seen Iran shoot down a $40 million American drone. What if they were to seize an American tanker, as they did with the British?
I think that would be another important step by Iran to demonstrate their aggression. I think Iran is a dangerous state that is a sponsor of terrorism, that is a destabilizing force in the region. The question is, at what point should we take either diplomatic action or military action against Iran? I think it's important that there be lines of communication open between us and the Iranians, so that some rogue element of the IRGC doesn't draw us into a hot war that we're not fully prepared for. And frankly, we've been asking for the administration to send someone to brief us on the strategy that they're intending to follow in the event there's an escalation like the one you referenced, the seizure of an American flag tanker.
Senator Chris Coons, a Democrat who serves on the Judiciary and Foreign Relations Committee. Senator, thank you.
Thank you, John.
Well, a frightening incident involving
policies. A year after the government began investigating the tech company for accessing users' data without consent. As part of the agreement, Facebook will form an independent privacy committee, which could diminish the power of CEO Mark Zuckerberg on privacy decisions.
Fox News alert now, a federal court sending a message to the White House. A California judge blocking new restrictions on those seeking asylum. The ruling coming only hours after another judge on the East Coast ruled to uphold the new policy. William Lajeunesse is live in Los Angeles to break all of this down for us. Hey, William, good morning.
Good morning, Sandra. The end result is another attempt by the administration to gain control over the border has failed. For the second time, federal Judge John Tigar in San Francisco stopped the administration from imposing rules designed to stop asylum fraud and stem the surge of Central Americans. The judge, appointed by President Obama, said the U.S. could not discourage so-called asylum or country shopping by requiring migrants to claim and be denied asylum in other countries they travel through before reaching the U.S. The same judge months ago said the U.S. could not deny asylum to those who cross the border illegally. The Supreme Court upheld that ruling 5-4. Yesterday, the ACLU praised this latest injunction.
The administration is doing an end run around what Congress enacted. Congress made clear that merely going through another country was not a basis to deny someone asylum. If this rule were upheld, it would essentially be the end of asylum at the southern border.
Tigar's ruling came just hours after another federal judge, this one in Washington, D.C., came to the opposite conclusion. He let the policy stand pending appeal. In a statement, the administration at the time called it, quote, a victory for Americans concerned about the crisis at our southern border. The court properly rejected the attempt of a few special interest groups to block a rule that discourages abuse of our asylum system. So the bottom line is, the injunction means the U.S. must still consider asylum claims from anyone, regardless of how many countries they travel through before they get here. Both rulings, Sandra, will likely be appealed, and the Supreme Court would again be asked to reconcile any conflict. Back to you.
All right, William Lajeunesse, thank you.
The stock market will open in just a couple of moments as a new poll shows Americans are more confident about the economy than they've been in nearly 20 years. We'll dig into the numbers next. Plus, this.
You charge Rick Gates for false statements. You charge Paul Manafort. You charge Michael Cohen. You charge Michael Flynn. The guy who puts the country through this whole saga, starts it all. For 3 years we've lived this now. He lies, and you guys don't charge him.
It was a tense exchange yesterday between Congressman Jim Jordan and Robert Mueller on the origins of the Russia investigation. So where does all of this go next? The Ohio Republican will join us live next.
When people who supported Trump lied, he threw the book at them. When people like Christopher Steele, who hated Trump, lied, or when Glenn Simpson was engaging in Russians, Robert Mueller was hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil.
The economy, 51% of those polled calling the U.S. economy excellent or good, the highest number in nearly 20 years. And with that, here's a quick look at the markets this morning. The Dow Jones Industrial's down just a few points. Yesterday was a pretty good day, except for the Dow.
Record-breaking day.
Yeah.
S&P and NASDAQ, fresh record highs. This is going to set up 2020. It's going to be very interesting to see how both parties handle the economy.
Most voters vote their pocketbooks, and right now the economy is booming.
Hot.
So we'll see what happens come 2020.
We will indeed.
The FBI interviewed Joseph Mifsud on February 10th, 2017. He lied 3 times, you pointed out in the report. Why didn't you charge him with the crime?
I can't get into internal deliberations with regard who would or would not be.
The guy who puts the country through this whole saga, starts it all. For 3 years we've lived this now. He lies, and you guys don't charge him. And I'm curious as to why.
Well, I can't get into it.
Maybe a better course of action is to figure out how the false accusation started. Maybe it's to go back and actually figure out why Joseph Mifsud was lying to the FBI.
Congressman Jim Jordan there grilling Robert Mueller about the origins of the FBI's Russia investigation, which led to his appointment as special counsel. But Mueller did, as you noticed, dodge his questions a bit, citing an ongoing Justice Department review. Congressman Jordan joining us now with his reaction to Mueller's testimony. Congressman, good morning to you. Fair to say he was dodging your questions there? You chose to dig into the origins of the investigation. That was your goal heading into this. You have been a critic of this investigation all along. Did you get any answers?
No, but this underscores why it's so important what Bill Barr's doing. The investigation he has tasked John Durham, the U.S. attorney from Connecticut, to lead to find out how this whole thing started. Because remember, in 2016, as I said yesterday, the FBI did something they probably hadn't done before. They spied on 2 American citizens associated with the presidential campaign. Carter Page and George Papadopoulos, who were working for President Trump's campaign, were spied on. 2 Americans spied on by our government. And as it turns out, this whole conspiracy theory was completely false. So that's why it's important to get to the bottom of this. And that's exactly what Bill Barr, the Attorney General, is doing.
I want to know what you think this means for Democrats after what we saw play out in both those hearings yesterday, what it means for their push for impeachment. I'll read you a new tweet from Al Green, the Democrat from Texas. He just tweeted out yesterday's testimony was evidence of analysis paralysis. We waited 2 years for the Mueller report and 3 months for Mr. Mueller to testify. There was no aha moment because we've had the report and watched or discussed the president's impeachable actions ad nauseum. # impeach now. What does that tell you about how they plan to proceed with the push for impeachment?
Yeah, they're going to keep going. In fact, today in the Oversight Committee, in less than an hour, we're going to start. And they're going to issue subpoenas for Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump's emails. I mean, they're never going to stop going after the president and the first family and anything associated with the Trump administration. So we know that's going to happen. But remember this, most of the country knows the truth, which is there is no basis for impeachment. After yesterday's hearing, I bet more people in the country feel like there is no basis for impeachment. But that's not going to stop the Democrats, because all they care about is stopping the president instead of focusing on actually doing things that would help the country.
In that heated exchange with Robert Mueller yesterday, Congressman, you asked him specifically if he interviewed himself certain witnesses that you were bringing up. He responded, I can't get into that. I believe it was about Mifsud. He was asked at one point during that hearing yesterday how many of the 500 plus interviews he actually sat in on, to which he responded, very few. Did that surprise you?
No, not really, but I would be curious as to which few he actually sat in on. I mean, I know they didn't go, well, I don't think they went back and had a second interview with Mifsud. The FBI interviewed Mifsud prior to the special counsel being named. So I wonder who those few were. But yeah, it didn't really surprise me. I mean, I think we got from yesterday, Bob Mueller wasn't the guy actually putting this all together and doing the hard work. I think it was those 18 lawyers, most of whom were pretty partisan Democrat lawyers, and the 40 agents that he had working with him. So that didn't really surprise me, but I would be curious as to which few he actually did set in on.
And then there was this moment where the special counsel, the former special counsel, said he was not familiar with Fusion GPS, the firm behind the Steele dossier. Watch this.
When you talk about the firm that produced the Steele reporting, the name of the firm that produced that was Fusion GPS. Is that correct?
Well, I'm not familiar with that.
Let me just help. It was. It's not a trick question. Right? It was Fusion GPS.
It's hard to believe that he wouldn't be familiar with Fusion GPS.
I don't know if Director Mueller was confused by the question or didn't hear, because that is really hard to believe because they've been in the news. I also think it's interesting. I don't know that they interviewed Glenn Simpson. I mean, Glenn Simpson gave false testimony to the Senate. Glenn Simpson took the fifth when he was interviewed and brought in for a deposition in front of the House. I don't know if the special counsel even interviewed the guy who was, again, sort of at the heart of all this, the guy paying a foreigner to put together the document that was used as the basis to go get a warrant to spy on Carter Page. I don't even know if they talked to the guy, which, again, I keep coming back to this. This underscores why what the Justice Department is doing now, what the Attorney General, Bill Barr's investigation into how this whole thing started, why that is so darn important.
You have implied, you did so yesterday, you've done so throughout this process, Congressman, that you believe Robert Mueller was biased in his decision-making in this investigation. Did your views change at all yesterday on that?
No, they didn't. And look, when you have, well, let me say it this way. I like what Emmett Flood said, and I think this is so important for everyone to understand. If they can do this to a president of the United States, if they can go spy on two people, two Americans associated with his campaign on this idea that there was somehow some conspiracy, which we know is now completely false. If they can do that to a president, imagine what they can do to you and I. And it sure looks like that's what they did. And there was no proper predication, as the Attorney General testified to 12 weeks ago. He doesn't know that there was a proper predicate for the spying that took place. That scares me. And for Bob Mueller not to even look at that, not even want to answer any questions about that, that's a big concern. And so this is why, again, it's so darn important what's happening at the Justice Department now in the investigation John Durham's heading up.
I only have a few seconds left. How would you characterize the reaction on Capitol Hill this morning, Congressman, to Mueller Day yesterday?
Well, again, I don't think it's what the Democrats were hoping to get from that hearing. I think the vast majority of Americans know impeachment is unwarranted, and I think after yesterday's hearing, that number is even higher.
Congressman Jim Jordan, appreciate your time this morning. Thank you.
You bet. Thank you.
Several of the Democratic presidential candidates are in Indianapolis this morning to speak at the National Urban League Conference after Joe Biden was attacked on his record by 2020 rivals Senators Cory Booker and Kamala Harris. The former VP warns he won't be as polite at the next debate. Peter Ducey is live in Indianapolis with more. Peter.
John, over the last couple of decades, America has gotten to know the softer side of Joe Biden, but they're about to get to see the other side because at a fundraiser last night, he told donors about next week's debate stage pairing with Kamala Harris. He said, "I'm not going to be as polite this time because this is the same person who asked me to come to California and nominate her in her convention." And Biden isn't just attacking Kamala Harris. He's going after Cory Booker as well because Booker told reporters he's disappointed it took Biden so long to see the problems with the tough 1994 crime bill. So Biden took some time to review Booker's resume.
If you look at the mayor's record in Newark, one of the provisions I wrote in the crime bill, a pattern and practice of misbehavior, his police department was stopping and frisking people, mostly African-American men. We took action against them.
Biden's backers believe he is the most electable Democrat in a potential head-to-head matchup with President Trump. But a few minutes ago, Booker argued that electability shouldn't just be about name ID. It should be about a candidate's record while they weren't running for something.
Because most of the time when somebody is asking about electability, they're not asking about the African-American voters who make up the most reliable constituency of the Democratic Party.
So Booker with the veiled jab. We do expect the former Vice President Biden here any minute. If he wants to return fire, you'll see it here. John?
All right, Peter Ducey. Peter, thank you.
Well, a scary moment at Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson Airport. Police say Edith Vega put her toddler son down to print her boarding pass at the Spirit Airlines kiosk. And then the boy jumped on the conveyor belt and was taken back to the TSA bag room. He would ride along with the luggage until he was thankfully rescued by a TSA agent. The toddler had a severely swollen and bruised right hand, but we are told should be okay. As a parent, you can understand how this could happen. You know, you're doing a lot of things. You have a lot of things when you're at the airport.
The video stopped just before he went into that bag X-ray machine. I can't imagine that's good for the human body. Those are some pretty powerful x-rays in that
Very
thing.
scary.
Let's hope he didn't go through that.
Right, well, glad he's okay, though.
Yeah. And breaking overnight, North Korea launches 2 short-range missiles into the Sea of Japan. We'll discuss the message these tests send to the U.S. less than a month after President Trump's historic meeting with Kim Jong-un at the DMZ.
Plus, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez set to meet face-to-face. What this could mean for the future of the House Democrats. Next.
I did feel that singling out on the base
to face amid Ocasio-Cortez's public feud with the president. She and other members of the so-called squad have split with Pelosi on recent votes. Ocasio-Cortez also accused the speaker of singling out her and her colleagues over race.
Breaking this morning, North Korea conducting missile tests, firing 2 short-range ballistic missiles that landed in the sea. These are the first tests since President Trump and Kim Jong-un's historic meeting at the DMZ. Gordon Chang is an Asia analyst and the author of Losing South Korea. He joins us live in studio this morning. Gordon, we're going to get to your new editorial in just a moment, but, you hear short-range missile tests. That sounds like very non-threatening, but these are significant because these missiles show, or at least the second one shows, all of South Korea could be in range.
Certainly. And the missiles that North Korea fired just a few hours ago are considered to be first strike weapons. So clearly South Korea's got to be concerned. Also, these tests, although they're short range, John, they are violations of UN Security Council resolutions, as were the missiles that were fired off in May by North Korea. And clearly North Korea thinks it can escalate without cost. And until we start enforcing those resolutions, North Korea will be right.
So what should the U.S. response and the world response be?
It should be go back to the Security Council, toughen up those resolutions, and the U.S. should start with its maximum pressure campaign again, the one that was enforced through May of last year, where we were vigorously enforcing sanctions. Since then, we enforce sanctions, but not with the same rigor.
Kim Jong-un tends to act up like this when he wants attention, doesn't he? What's he looking for out of this?
Well, he's looking for a couple things, and the most important, though, is the relief from U.S. sanctions. Even though we are not going full bore on them, they still are hurting the North Korean regime. And our theory is if we don't go full bore, at least the North Koreans will maybe talk to us. But unfortunately, the working level talks that Kim Jong-un promised at that end of June summit, they haven't started yet, and we're really much further behind than we thought we would be.
Would he be making launches like these without China's tacit approval?
I don't think so. I think that clearly Beijing is control here. We saw Kim Jong-un go to Chinese soil 4 times in a row, starting in March of last year. That really shows the nature of the relationship, where Kim does consult with the Chinese whenever there's something important to talk about. And Kim, on small things he can defy China, as he sometimes does, but on the big issues like missile launches, Beijing has got to approve.
I want to play a bit of sound from former Vice President Joe Biden. This was May 1st. Now, he made his name on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee for his mastery of international affairs. Listen.
China is going to eat our lunch? Come on, man. I mean, they're not bad folks, but guess what? They're not they're competition for us.
I would point our viewers to an editorial you write in today's Wall Street Journal. It's titled, Xi Changed My Mind About Trump. And you go on to write, Mr. Trump is the only thing that stands between us and a world dominated by China. Tell us about that.
Yeah, Xi Jinping, the Chinese ruler, for more than a decade now, has been dropping hints, increasingly explicit hints, that China's the world's only sovereign state. We often compare him to Mao, the first ruler of the People's Republic, but he's acting more like China's imperial rulers who believed that they had the right and indeed the obligation to rule all under heaven, or Tianxia. Xi Jinping is using this Tianxia language, and he's making the case that, look, Americans, others don't have sovereignty.
I would love to ask you more, but I'm getting the wrap. Gordon Chang, our viewers can look for your Wall Street Journal editorial today. Thank you. Thanks, John. Sandra.
All right, new developments in the murder of an Ole Miss college student. Police releasing surveillance video of Allie Costiel just hours before she died. How that video relates to her murder.
Plus, the manhunt for 2 teenagers suspected in the murders of a North Carolina woman and her Australian boyfriend. Why police are expanding their search.
This is a fast-moving investigation and is compounded by several factors. Those things contribute